What does Jesus, Yeshua, have in common with yoga? Now this is very interesting. I noticed something etymologically through the words, through English, which is a very interesting language. I remember Santos Bonacci detailing that English comes from Anglish, it's Germanic, which is angelic. It has a certain angelic counterpart to the language. And through that, I obviously got into my etymology, and it came upon me that there's something here with Jesus, Yeshua, not Yahweh, more or less, and yoga. So this is very interesting. When we listen to someone speak about Jesus nowadays, we don't really see a lot of Christians live up to what Christ actually said to do, which is to be like him, not to follow him, but do as I do. And nowadays people say, do as I say, don't do as I do. Well, that's the opposite of what Jesus was like. Jesus was like, no, hold me accountable, do what I do and not what I say, right? Because he had respect and he knew that the action and the word were two in one. So where does yoga come into this, and English and everything I just mentioned? So when you look at the letter Y, the actual letter Y itself, it's composed of two lines coming down into one. I'll probably leave it up here on the screen for you guys. Well, you guys know it already, you can see it in your brain. And those two letters are your hands, right? I would do the whole prayer thing, but I'm having some very nice coconut milk and some raw honey to drink. So that essentially is the whole premise of yoga and Jesus, which is actually Yah. And how it condenses and how it breaks down into English, some form in some way, I do not know. But the fact that the letter Y itself is union, you and ion. So it's your spirit, it's your soul. Well, more so your spirit, not your soul. Because your soul is already whole with everything else. But it's more so your spirit, you, and ion, matter. Union. You and ion. So when people pray, they put their hands together from the Y, right? From the base of their palm, which can be read in chiromancy, which is also known as palm reading. And they put them together, which forms more or less the letter Y, into some sort of action. This is interesting now. Yoga and the 8 limbs of yoga, it is the most robust system in terms of granting you union, granting you a path to follow, to live by. Especially the first two arms, which I really am into. Nama and Niyama. What you do and what you don't do. So what you don't do matters, but also what you do does matter. Which is why you find a lot of yogis that are vegan, because of ahimsa within Yama. And it is essentially the practice of non-violence and living in a way of non-violence as well. That's super important. That's just one example. And we find that Jesus was, those of you that do know, someone who was known as an Essene. And the mystical schools have existed for a long time. Jesus being part of them. Yeshua being part of them. And it's super interesting. We find yogis on this path for union, right? Let me just take a sip. We find yogis on this path of union, which I find interesting. But union from what, right? Union from the forces of up, down, left, right, in, out, forwards, backwards. You have good, you have bad. I feel sad, I feel happy. I feel hate, I feel happy. It's interesting, isn't it? So, seagulls screaming at me. So, with that being said, that is the base premise on the connection between the letter Y, Jesus, and yoga. It is simply a path of union. And yoga is a way of life, of doing things, right? And not doing things, other things as well. What you do matters, but what you don't do also matters, okay? And that's very important. So a little bit more about yoga that I'd like to express is the fact that yoga is to create a union, if you look up the word etymologically, I'll leave it up here, is for union. But the good thing about it is like it's to yolk, it's to make in a union. Kind of how people put a cracked egg in a flower pot and they mix it. That's what yoga is, mixing everything, mixing life and being okay with that and living with that. Because we're conditioned since birth to believe that certain things are good and certain things are bad. How about certain things are just certain things? Or how about if they're not even certain, they're just things? Or how about if they're not even things, they're just... Now that's interesting. So, to yolk. When you hear the word yolk coming into mind, you hear the yolk of an egg, right? The egg. What came first? The egg or the chicken? An idea or materiality? Well, that's another one we'll get into some other day, but I find that one very interesting. So, to yolk. When you think of that, to yolk, you're like, egg, yolk. What does that have to do with Jesus and yoga and everything else? When you look at a yolk, is it any other color than yellow? Or golden, I'd like to say. Gold? No. When you look at the sun, right? It's hiding behind the clouds here. But when you look at the sun, is it any other color than golden? No. It's also not. So, here's what I find interesting. Yeshua was someone who existed, but also a personification of the actual sun, who we shouldn't really call sun, right? If you have learned that you live in a geocentric realm and plane, you realize that astrology is much more important than you would have thought, because these magnificent stars that essentially rule us, right? And even outside of geocentrism, but especially in geocentrism, right? These magnificent stars are not just balls in the sky, they are actual beings, but more on that later. The sun is golden. The yolk of an egg is golden. And yoga is to be gold, right? Is to access that gold. But you can't access that gold without, for example, I've always had a saying for a few years that just came out of me. You can't walk on gold without having walked on glass first. Broken glass, that is. Meaning there's a good side and there's a bad side to that, right? These seagulls are really going crazy around me. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, it's essentially to show the duality, right? This is all about the duality, to yoke. What are you yoking? What are you uniting? What are those two sides of the letter Y, right? I think it was a plane. And that's super interesting. I find that completely magnificent, how just the letter Y, you can dictate a lot from it. And actually there's 3 parts of the letter Y. You know, we have 360 degrees, and there are 3 parts that you can measure with differing degrees. 1 inside the cup of Y and 2 on the outside. A trifecta, some would call it. Very interesting, very interesting. So when I think of yoga and yoga, I really think of the first yoga asana sequence, which is Surya Namaskar, worshipping of the sun, right? Because we are sun worshippers. And some of us like to worship other beings in the sky, gods, goddesses. And some of us don't. Some of us create a religion, have created a religion from what was once the truth, an objective truth, and decided to live in a monotheistic way when reality shows that this is a polytheistic system. Now, this may be up for controversy, or you might think something else, but frankly, that's not my business. If it works for you, it works for you. If you're a happy person, you're a happy person. It's got nothing to do with me. But it's once again super interesting to see how the yolk, the egg, the yoga, once again shows us above. It shows us that there is a little bit more to the simple words that we use, like yoga, yolk, Yeshua. And it's a bit tricky leading the modern waters online, especially, but just within yourself, from what you hear, right? From what you hear from other people, from what you hear from other sources of information. And I hope this video has at least given you some purpose or some clarity into what it is that you can dissect from the words that you have in front of you, the letters even, and the meanings from them that you yourself can deduct. So, that being said, that is all I have to say about this at this current moment. And it is a simple observation I made. I didn't really have to read it anywhere, which is why I'm sharing this. And I find it super interesting. So I hope you guys have found some common ground between the yogis and the Christians and everything in between. And you have seen that this world is hidden with messages right in your face. It's interesting. But anyways, I'm going to let you guys go and have a very peaceful day, evening, night, whenever and wherever you're watching this.